Imagine waking up tomorrow morning feeling completely fine, no chest pain, no warning signs, no reason to worry. You go through your usual routine, just like you have for years. But here's what nobody tells you: the very first 30 seconds after you open your eyes could be silently setting the stage for a heart attack. Not in 30 years, not even in 30 days, potentially today. Let me be very clear about something right from the start. Heart attacks don't just happen to people who eat badly or never exercise. They happen to marathon runners. They happen to people who take their medications every single day. They happen to people who had a completely clean checkup just 6 months ago. And in the majority of cases, they happen in the morning, specifically within the first few hours of waking up. This is not a coincidence. This is biology. And once you understand what your body is doing in those first moments after you wake up, you will never look at your morning routine the same way again. So what is that 30-second mistake? Well, it's not just one thing. It's a cascade of things that most people do automatically without thinking every single morning. And the terrifying part is that each one of these habits feels completely harmless. They feel normal because they are normal. Millions of people do them. But normal doesn't mean safe. And today, we are going to break down exactly what's happening inside your cardiovascular system the moment you wake up, why the morning hours are the deadliest window for your heart, and what small science-backed changes can dramatically lower your risk starting tomorrow. Now, to understand the danger, you first have to understand what your body goes through while you sleep. Most people think of sleep as just rest, your body powering down, your heart taking a break. But that's not what's actually happening. While you sleep, your body is running a full maintenance program. Your brain is filing memories. Your immune system is repairing tissue. And your heart is working at its lowest, most relaxed pace all night long. Your blood pressure drops. Your heart rate slows down. Your blood becomes, and this is important, slightly thicker. Because when you're lying flat and still, your body doesn't need to push blood around with as much force. Everything slows. Everything settles. And in that quiet, calm state, your cardiovascular system is essentially at peace. But then something happens. Your alarm goes off. And in that single moment, in that jarring, abrupt transition from deep sleep to sudden wakefulness, your body launches into what scientists call the cortisol awakening response. Your adrenal glands flood your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate climbs. Your blood vessels constrict. Your blood pressure surges, sometimes by as much as 25% in just a matter of minutes. And that thick, slightly sluggish blood that settled during the night now suddenly has to move fast through vessels that have just tightened. That combination, thick blood, narrow vessels, spiking pressure, is exactly the environment in which blood clots form. And blood clots, as you probably know, are what cause the majority of heart attacks. This is why cardiologists and researchers have known for decades that the hours between 6 in the morning and noon are the most dangerous hours for the heart. A landmark study published in the journal Circulation found that heart attacks are 60 to 70% more likely to occur in the morning than at any other time of day. 60 to 70%. That's not a small statistical blip, that's a massive, undeniable pattern. And the reason it happens comes down to this morning biological storm that your body goes through every single day. Now, here's where the 30-second mistake comes in. Because this morning surge in cortisol, in blood pressure, in clotting tendency, that's biology, you can't fully stop it. But what you can control is how you respond to it. And what most people do in those first 30 seconds makes everything worse. Far worse. The first thing most people do, and I want you to think about your own morning right now, is they hear their alarm and they immediately, forcefully sit up or jump out of bed. Some people even leap to their feet. And this sudden change in posture triggers something called orthostatic hypotension, which is a dramatic and rapid drop in blood pressure that happens when you go from lying flat to standing upright too quickly. Now your heart, which just seconds ago was in a state of hormonal high alert, now has to deal with blood pooling downward into your legs because gravity just changed everything. Your brain momentarily gets less blood. You might feel dizzy. You might not even notice it. But your heart is working overtime. It's pumping against that cortisol surge, trying to compensate for the postural change, and doing it all with blood that is at its thickest and most clot-prone of the entire day. For a young, completely healthy heart, this stress is manageable. The system compensates and moves on. But for anyone with even minor undetected arterial stiffness, which, by the way, affects a large proportion of adults over the age of 40, this combination of events is genuinely dangerous. Arterial stiffness means your blood vessels can't flex and absorb pressure changes the way they should. So when that blood pressure spike hits those stiff vessels, it's like sending a high-pressure surge through an old pipe. Something can give. A plaque that has been quietly sitting on the wall of a coronary artery for years, stable, harmless, going nowhere, can suddenly rupture under that pressure. And when plaque ruptures, your body treats it like an injury. It sends clotting factors to the site a clot forms. And if that clot is large enough to block blood flow through the artery, that's a heart attack right there in your bedroom. In the first few minutes of your day, this is not a rare or extreme scenario. This is the mechanism behind the majority of morning heart attacks, and it is almost entirely preventable. But before we get into what you should do, let's keep going, because the mistake doesn't stop at getting up too fast. What most people do next compounds the danger in ways that are just as serious and far less talked about. The second part of the morning mistake involves dehydration. And I know what you're thinking. Everyone knows you should drink water in the morning. But knowing it and understanding why it matters for your heart are two completely different things. After 6 to 8 hours of sleep, your body has lost significant fluid. You've been breathing, and every breath you exhale carries moisture. You've been sweating slightly through your skin. Some of you in warm climates are losing even more. By the time you wake up, your blood volume has decreased. And when blood volume drops, blood becomes more concentrated, more viscous, thicker, and far more likely to clot. Here's the critical point. Most people wake up, rush through their morning, maybe have a cup of coffee, which, by the way, is a diuretic and actually pulls more water out of your system, and goes sometimes an hour or more before drinking any meaningful amount of water. During that entire time, your blood is at maximum viscosity, your blood pressure is elevated from the cortisol surge, and your body is under physiological stress. You are, without realizing it, maintaining the perfect internal conditions for a cardiovascular event. And this is where it gets really concerning. Many people immediately reach for their phone. Think about what happens the moment you pick up your phone first thing in the morning, before you've even taken a sip of water. Before your nervous system has had a chance to fully transition out of sleep, you're immediately hit with notifications, emails, news headlines, social media, messages you missed overnight. And your brain, which is still in that vulnerable, half-alert state, begins processing all of that incoming information as potential threat. Did something go wrong at work? What's happening in the news? Why did that person send that message at midnight? Your stress response, which was already elevated from the cortisol awakening surge, now gets a second wave, another hit of adrenaline, another spike in blood pressure, another tightening of blood vessels. Scientists call this digital stress loading, and its cardiovascular consequences are very real. A study out of the University of California found that people who check their phones within the first few minutes of waking up show measurably higher cortisol levels throughout the entire rest of the day. Not just in the morning, but all day long. That means your heart is operating under elevated stress hormones for hours longer than it needs to be, simply because of what you looked at in those first few minutes. Your cardiovascular system doesn't distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one. To your heart, an alarming news headline triggers the same hormonal response as being chased by a predator. The adrenaline doesn't know the difference. And when you stack that second stress hit on top of an already surging morning cortisol response, on top of dehydration, on top of having jumped out of bed too fast, you've now created a perfect storm inside your chest. Now, I want to talk about something that very few people connect to heart attack risk, because it seems so completely unrelated. And that is the act of holding your breath, or more precisely, the habit of shallow breathing in the morning. Most people, especially those who wake up stressed or rush out of bed quickly, immediately shift into what's called sympathetic dominant breathing. Short, shallow breaths that don't fully fill the lower lobes of the lungs. And this matters enormously for your heart. When you breathe shallowly, your blood oxygen levels don't rise the way they should after a night of sleep. Your body, sensing lower oxygen availability, responds by constricting blood vessels further, trying to prioritize oxygen delivery to vital organs. Blood pressure climbs, the heart works harder, and at the same time, Shallow breathing keeps your nervous system locked in that high alert, fight or flight state rather than allowing it to transition into the calm, parasympathetic mode that is protective for your heart. Here's something remarkable that the research shows: just 3 to 5 slow, deep breaths taken immediately after waking, before getting out of bed, before looking at your phone, before doing anything, can measurably reduce that morning blood pressure surge. Deep breathing activates the vagus nerve, which is the main highway of your parasympathetic nervous system. When the vagus nerve is stimulated, it sends a signal directly to your heart to slow down, to ease up, to come out of crisis mode. Your blood vessels relax. Your blood pressure begins to normalize, and that dangerous window of peak cardiovascular vulnerability starts to close. Something as simple as breathing, done correctly, done intentionally, can act as a biological brake on a process that kills hundreds of thousands of people every year. But there's another morning habit that I think is arguably the most underestimated cardiovascular risk factor in modern life, and it has to do with temperature. Specifically, what happens when people walk from a warm bed into a cold environment, or worse, step into an extremely hot shower immediately after waking up? Let me explain both of these because they operate through similar but distinct mechanisms. When your body goes from warm to cold suddenly, say you kick off the blankets, your feet hit a cold floor, you walk to a cold bathroom, your blood vessels constrict rapidly in response to the temperature drop. This is called cold-induced vasoconstriction. And in the context of an already elevated morning blood pressure and already thickened blood, this additional constriction can push blood pressure to genuinely dangerous levels in a matter of seconds. In colder climates and during winter months, morning heart attack rates climb significantly, and this vascular response to cold is a major reason why. Now, the hot shower does something different, but equally problematic for a vulnerable heart. When you step into a very hot shower, the heat causes your blood vessels to dilate rapidly, suddenly opening wide, which pulls blood toward the surface of the skin and away from your core. Your blood pressure drops quickly. Your heart has to pump faster to compensate. For someone with coronary artery disease, even mild, undiagnosed coronary artery disease, which affects a staggering number of people who have no idea, this rapid demand on the heart, while it's already navigating the morning cortisol surge, can trigger what's called demand ischemia. That's when the heart muscle is asking for more oxygen than the narrowed arteries can deliver. And demand ischemia is a direct pathway to a heart attack. This doesn't mean you can't take a morning shower. It means the temperature and the timing matter far more than anyone ever told you. And we'll get to the specific recommendations. But first, I want to address the group of people who are most at risk, because while everything I've described affects everyone to some degree, there is a subset of the population for whom these morning habits are genuinely life-threatening, not just theoretically risky. If you are over the age of 45, if you have high blood pressure, even well-controlled high blood pressure, if you have diabetes, if you smoke or have smoked in the past, if you are carrying significant weight around your midsection, if you have a family history of heart disease, or if you've been told your cholesterol is elevated, then you are operating with a cardiovascular system that has less reserve, less flexibility, and less tolerance for the kind of morning stress we've been talking about. Your arteries are likely stiffer. Your plaque burden, even if it's never caused symptoms, is likely higher. And your morning cortisol response may actually be more exaggerated because chronic stress, insulin resistance, and poor sleep quality all amplify the magnitude of that morning hormonal surge. There's a concept in cardiology called vulnerable plaque, and it is central to understanding why so many heart attacks happen with almost no warning. Vulnerable plaque is cholesterol-rich deposits inside the walls of your coronary arteries that have a thin, fragile cap over them. These plaques don't necessarily block much blood flow, which is why they often don't show up as significant findings on standard stress tests. They're not the big, calcified, obstructive plaques that everyone worries about. They're the quiet ones, the hidden ones. And they are exquisitely sensitive to exactly the kind of mechanical stress that your morning blood pressure spike creates. When that surge of pressure hits a vulnerable plaque, the thin cap can crack, fissure, rupture, and in the seconds that follow, a clot forms with terrifying speed, and a completely asymptomatic person becomes a cardiac emergency. What's particularly sobering is that research suggests that in many cases of sudden cardiac death, People who collapse without any prior history of heart problems, vulnerable plaque rupture, triggered by a physiological stressor, is the underlying mechanism. And the most common physiological stressor in the documented cases, waking up in the morning. Now I want to shift gears slightly because this conversation isn't meant to frighten you, it's meant to empower you. Because here is the genuinely good news buried inside all of this. The morning biological storm is real and unavoidable, but its consequences are largely preventable. The things that transform a manageable morning cortisol surge into a cardiac event are almost entirely behavioral. They are things you do, things you choose. And that means they are things you can change. Let's start talking about what that actually looks like, what the morning routine of someone who is actively protecting their heart looks like according to the best available cardiovascular science. Because this is where the information becomes truly actionable. And it begins not with what you do when you wake up, but with what you do the night before. Sleep quality is one of the most powerful and most ignored determinants of morning cardiovascular risk. Here's why. The magnitude of your morning cortisol surge is directly related to the quality and duration of your sleep. People who get less than 6 hours of sleep or who experience fragmented, poor quality sleep show significantly higher morning cortisol levels and more exaggerated blood pressure spikes upon waking compared to people who sleep well. This has been demonstrated in multiple rigorous studies. Poor sleep also increases inflammatory markers in the blood, including C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, which independently increase the risk of plaque rupture. And poor sleep increases the tendency of platelets, the tiny blood cells responsible for clotting, to aggregate, to stick together, making clot formation far more likely. So if you are sleeping 5 hours a night and wondering why you feel cardiovascular stress in the morning, the answer starts the night before. Sleep is not a luxury for your heart, it is a clinical intervention. And getting 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep in a cool, dark, quiet room with a consistent sleep and wake time is one of the most powerful things you can do to reduce your morning cardiac risk. The second thing you can do the night before, and this is something almost nobody does, is hydrate before bed. Not excessively. You don't want to be waking up multiple times to use the bathroom because sleep fragmentation carries its own risks. But a glass of water before sleep can meaningfully reduce overnight blood viscosity and help your body enter the morning with slightly less thick blood. It's a small act with a measurable physiological benefit. Now let's talk about the morning itself and specifically about the first 5 minutes, because this is where the most critical decisions happen. When your alarm goes off, resist the urge, and I know it's strong to immediately sit up. Instead, lie still for 30 seconds to 1 minute. Keep your eyes open or closed, it doesn't matter. But breathe. Take 5 slow, deep breaths. Inhale through your nose for 4 counts. Let your belly expand, not your chest. Hold for just a second. Then exhale slowly through your mouth for 6 counts. Do that 5 times. This single practice, this 60-second breathing exercise activates your vagus nerve, begins to lower your cortisol response, and gives your cardiovascular system the time it needs to prepare for the transition to upright posture. Then, and only then, slowly bring yourself to a sitting position at the edge of your bed. Sit there for another 30 seconds. Let your body adjust. Let your blood pressure find its footing. Let your heart rate stabilize. This is not laziness. This is cardiovascular intelligence. The slow, graduated transition from lying to sitting to standing is one of the most important things a cardiologist would tell you to do if they were sitting in your bedroom every morning. Once you're standing, the next thing your body needs before coffee, before food, before your phone, before anything else is water. And I want to be very specific about this because the details matter. The ideal amount is somewhere between 400 and 600 milliliters, roughly 2 full glasses of plain water at room temperature. Not ice cold, because cold water can trigger a vagal response that momentarily slows the heart in unpredictable ways, particularly in people with underlying rhythm sensitivities. Not piping hot either. Room temperature water absorbs fastest into your system, begins restoring blood volume almost immediately, and starts thinning that overnight, thickened blood within minutes of consumption. Now here's something that has extraordinary scientific support, but almost never makes it into mainstream health conversations. Adding a small pinch of natural mineral, rich salt, not regular table salt, but something like Himalayan pink salt or a good quality sea salt, to your morning water can meaningfully support cardiovascular function. Here's the physiology behind that. During sleep, your kidneys continue filtering blood and excreting sodium. By morning, your sodium levels are slightly lower, and sodium is critical for maintaining blood pressure stability and proper fluid balance inside your cells. When you drink plain water on a sodium-depleted system, the water can actually pass through your gut quickly without being properly absorbed at the cellular level. A tiny pinch of mineral salt, we're talking less than an eighth of a teaspoon, helps your cells hold onto that water, improves hydration at the tissue level, and supports the kind of gentle, stable blood pressure regulation your heart desperately needs in those first waking minutes. This is completely different from adding a lot of salt to your diet throughout the day, which does raise blood pressure in salt-sensitive individuals. We're talking about a micro dose of minerals in the morning specifically to support cellular hydration. The distinction matters, and the science behind it is solid. Now let's talk about coffee, because I know this is the part that many of you have been waiting for, and I'm not going to tell you to give it up. But I am going to tell you that the timing of your first cup of coffee is far more important than whether you drink it at all. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in your brain. Adenosine is the chemical that builds up during waking hours and makes you feel sleepy. When caffeine blocks those receptors, you feel alert and energized. But caffeine also stimulates the release of adrenaline and causes blood vessels to constrict, which raises blood pressure. And in the context of an already elevated morning cortisol surge, drinking coffee within the first 30 to 45 minutes of waking stacks a caffeine-induced blood pressure and adrenaline response directly on top of your body's existing hormonal peak. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman has talked extensively about this, and the research supports it clearly. Cortisol and caffeine both activate overlapping stress response pathways. When you drink coffee while cortisol is already at its morning peak, you don't actually get a stronger alertness effect, you just get more cardiovascular stress without the additional cognitive benefit. Your cortisol is already doing the job of waking you up. The caffeine at that point is essentially a second hit of stimulation that your heart doesn't need and your brain doesn't particularly benefit from. The simple, evidence-based recommendation is to wait at least 60 to 90 minutes after waking before having your first coffee. Let your cortisol naturally peak and begin its decline. Drink your water first, do your breathing, move your body gently, and then, when your system has had time to stabilize, enjoy your coffee. Not only will your heart thank you, but you'll actually feel the alertness effect of caffeine more clearly because your cortisol will have dropped enough that the caffeine provides a genuine lift rather than just adding noise to an already noisy hormonal environment. Now I want to spend some time on physical activity in the morning because this is an area where the guidance is nuanced and where getting it wrong, particularly for people with existing cardiovascular risk, can be genuinely dangerous. There is a well-documented phenomenon in cardiology called exercise-induced cardiac events in the morning, and it doesn't happen to people who are sedentary. It happens disproportionately to people who exercise, specifically people who engage in intense exercise immediately after waking up, before their cardiovascular system has had adequate time to transition out of that vulnerable morning state. A study published in the European Heart Journal found that high-intensity exercise performed in the early morning hours was associated with a significantly higher rate of cardiac events compared to the same exercise performed later in the day. The reason is exactly what we've been discussing. In the morning, blood is thicker, vessels are stiffer, cortisol is high, and blood pressure is already elevated. Adding the significant cardiovascular demand of intense exercise, a hard run, heavy weightlifting, high-intensity interval training, on top of all of that creates a level of cardiac stress that a vulnerable heart may not be able to safely accommodate. This does not mean you shouldn't exercise in the morning. Exercise is one of the single most powerful long-term protections against heart disease that exists. What it means is that the first 15 to 20 minutes of any morning exercise should be genuinely gentle. A slow walk, light stretching, gentle yoga, some easy movement that gradually elevates your heart rate rather than spiking it. Think of it as warming up, not just your muscles, but your entire cardiovascular system. Give your blood vessels time to dilate and accommodate increased flow. Give your heart rate time to climb gradually rather than being shocked upward. After that 20-minute gentle warm-up, if you want to transition to more intense exercise, your system is far better prepared to handle it safely. And speaking of movement, One of the most underappreciated cardiovascular interventions that you can do in the morning requires absolutely no gym, no equipment, and takes less than 5 minutes. It is simply walking outside in natural light within the first 30 minutes of waking up. The research on this is remarkable. Natural morning light exposure, even on a cloudy day, triggers a neurological signal through your eyes to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the master clock of your body. This signal sets your circadian rhythm for the day, which directly regulates the timing and magnitude of your cortisol response. People who get morning light exposure consistently have lower peak morning cortisol levels, more stable blood pressure throughout the day, better sleep quality the following night, and measurably lower markers of cardiovascular inflammation. It is free, it is simple, and almost nobody does it. The cardiovascular benefits of morning light go even further. Sunlight on skin triggers the production of nitric oxide, a molecule that causes blood vessels to dilate and blood pressure to drop. Nitric oxide is essentially your body's natural antihypertensive medication. It relaxes the smooth muscle in vessel walls, improves blood flow, and reduces the risk of the kind of blood pressure spikes that precipitate cardiac events. Some researchers now believe that the global pattern of higher heart attack rates in northern latitudes and during winter months is partly explained by reduced sunlight exposure and the consequent reduction in skin-derived nitric oxide production. Morning light is not just good for your mood, it is good for your heart in direct, measurable, physiological ways. Now I want to address something that ties all of this together, and it is perhaps the most overlooked risk factor in the entire conversation about morning heart attacks. It is the emotional and psychological state in which you start your day. We live in a culture that treats alarm clocks as neutral tools, just a way to wake up on time. But the sound and the manner of waking has profound physiological consequences. Waking abruptly to a loud, jarring alarm sound, the classic beeping or buzzing alarm, produces a measurable spike in cortisol and adrenaline that is significantly larger than waking to a gradual, gentle sound or waking naturally. Multiple sleep studies have demonstrated this. The startle response triggered by a sudden loud noise activates your sympathetic nervous system instantaneously. Your heart rate accelerates, your blood pressure jumps, your muscles tense, and all of this happens before you are even fully conscious. Compare that to waking gradually, either naturally as your sleep cycle lightens and you surface from sleep on your own, or with a gentle alarm that starts quiet and slowly increases in volume, or with a light-based alarm that simulates a gradual sunrise. In these scenarios, your nervous system transitions more slowly and more smoothly from sleep to wakefulness. Your cortisol rises, but the spike is more gradual, more manageable. Your heart rate climbs without the abrupt lurch. And your blood pressure increase, while still present as part of the natural morning response, is less extreme. For people with cardiovascular risk factors, this difference in the manner of waking is not trivial. It can be the difference between a manageable morning surge and one that crosses the threshold into dangerous territory. There's also the emotional weight of what you expose yourself to in those first conscious minutes. The news, social media, stressful emails, all of these communicate urgency and threat to a nervous system that is already in a heightened state. And your heart bears the full physiological cost of that psychological stress. The stress is not imaginary, and the cardiovascular response is not metaphorical. It is biochemical, hormonal, and structural. Chronic psychological stress increases inflammation, accelerates atherosclerosis, promotes clot formation, and directly impairs the function of the endothelium, the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels that is your first line of defense against heart disease. Starting your day by flooding your nervous system with distressing content is, from a cardiovascular standpoint, a genuine risk factor. And replacing that habit with something calm, whether that's a few minutes of silence, slow breathing, gratitude, gentle music, or simply sitting quietly with your water and watching the light change outside, is not indulgent or naive. It is clinically protective. Let me bring this all together for you now, because I want you to leave this with something concrete, a clear picture of what a heart protective morning looks like, built entirely on the science we've covered. When your alarm sounds, don't leap out of bed. Lie still for 60 seconds and take 5 slow, deep belly breaths. Then sit at the edge of your bed for another 30 seconds. Stand up slowly before you touch your phone, before you turn on the television, before you do anything else. Drink 2 full glasses of room temperature water, ideally with a tiny pinch of mineral-rich salt. Walk to a window or step outside and let your eyes and skin receive natural morning light. Spend at least 10 minutes in gentle movement before any intensity, and delay that first cup of coffee by at least 60 minutes to let your cortisol peak before adding caffeine to the equation. These are not dramatic lifestyle overhauls. They are small, sequential adjustments to habits you already have, but their combined effect on your cardiovascular system is profound. You are essentially taking a morning biological storm that your body cannot avoid and dismantling it piece by piece, habit by habit, giving your heart the conditions it needs to navigate that vulnerable window safely. One final thing I want to leave you with, and this is important. Many heart attacks are preceded by warning signs that people either miss or dismiss. Unusual fatigue in the days before, not ordinary tiredness, but a deep, uncharacteristic exhaustion that doesn't resolve with rest. Mild discomfort in the chest, jaw, left arm, or upper back that comes and goes. Unexpected shortness of breath during activities that normally don't wind you. A vague sense that something is wrong, that your body doesn't feel right, even though you can't put your finger on exactly what it is. These are not minor complaints to be pushed through. These are your cardiovascular system sending distress signals. And if you experience any of them, especially in combination, that is not the moment to wait and see. That is the moment to seek medical attention, because the heart attack that is caught before it happens is the heart attack that doesn't happen. Your heart has been beating for you every single moment of your life without asking for anything in return. It has never taken a day off. It has never called in sick. It has adapted to every demand you have ever placed on it, quietly, faithfully, without complaint. The least you can do is give it 30 seconds of grace in the morning. 30 seconds of stillness and breath before the world rushes in, because those 30 seconds might just be the most important 30 seconds of your day. So let's take a step back and look at the full picture of everything we've covered today, because when you see it all together, something important becomes very clear. The heart attack that happens in the morning is almost never truly sudden. It is the end result of a process, a biological storm that builds in predictable, understandable ways. And what we've learned today is that almost every step of that process can be interrupted, not with expensive medications, not with complex medical procedures, but with awareness and with small, deliberate choices made in the first few minutes of each day. We learned that the morning hours carry the highest cardiovascular risk of the entire 24-hour cycle, not because of bad luck, but because of a perfect convergence of elevated cortisol, thickened blood, rising blood pressure, and constricting blood vessels. We learned that the way most people wake up, abruptly, rushing upright, reaching for their phone, skipping water, drinking coffee immediately, amplifies every one of those biological risk factors simultaneously. And we learned that the antidote isn't complicated. It is breathe first, move slowly, hydrate before anything else, let light in. Protect the first 30 minutes of your day the way you would protect anything else you truly value. But here is perhaps the most important thing to carry with you after watching this. Knowledge without action is just information. And information on its own has never saved a single life. What saves lives is the moment a person decides, genuinely decides, that their health is worth 5 extra minutes of intentionality in the morning, that their heart deserves the same care and attention they give to their work, their family, their phone screen, because you cannot pour from an empty vessel. You cannot show up fully for the people you love if your heart isn't given the basic conditions it needs to keep beating. The changes we've talked about today require no prescription. They require no gym membership. They require no special equipment or significant time investment. They require only the decision to do things slightly differently than you did yesterday. And that decision, made consistently, morning after morning, compounds over time into a cardiovascular system that is more resilient, more protected, and more capable of carrying you through a long and healthy life. Share this with someone you love, a parent who wakes up and immediately rushes into the chaos of the day, a friend who jokes about surviving on 3 hours of sleep and black coffee, a partner who jumps out of bed the moment the alarm sounds and never slows down. Because the information in this video isn't just useful. For the right person, at the right moment, it could genuinely be life-saving. And that is not an exaggeration. That is simply what understanding your own biology and choosing to respect it can do. Your heart is extraordinary. Treat it that way starting tomorrow morning.